Welcome, everybody. It's telling me that we are live.
We live?
Yeah, if you can read these name tags. I am Chris. I am the voice behind History Dose, the researcher, writer, narrator. And this is
I
Joe,
am
the
Joe. I'm the editor, the artist, and now the pseudo composer for some of the tracks in History Dose.
and yeah, we happen to know each other. If you think that we look similar, it's because we are two strangers who happen to have the same set of parents.
Yeah, just happened we bumped into each other one day.
So I wanted to jump right into it today. As you can see from the title, I was going to jump into some behind the scenes for our Nez Perce episode. We put a ton of effort into getting really minute details correct on this. And so one of the fascinating things was
Well, before we begin, are our mics coming through? Because I think the last live stream we had a little bit of technical difficulties.
just let me know
So,
if our
yeah,
voices sound horrible.
yeah, just let us know in the chat.
But one of the awesome things about this video is that last May we went to Yellowstone National Park. We got a wildlife tour, or it wasn't a wildlife tour; it was a private tour, and they took us around the park for 3-4 days, and it's just amazing. It's the most beautiful thing you'll ever see. You see animals everywhere you look, and so this is the first time we've used our photos as reference. I guess we did once for the pirate episode. We did one picture as a reference for a specific island that we were looking at. But all right, this is the second time. These photos on top were ones that we took, some of the best ones we took. And when Chief Joseph in the video goes to Yellowstone National Park with the rest of the Nez Perce, the funny thing is, I wanted to have Joe paint what we saw, but then as I was researching it, I had to rephrase the script because as I looked into it, I realized that the bison were at they were almost completely wiped out, or if not completely wiped out, there was something like I think when they recorded the data on how many bison there were in the national park just a few years later, there were like 24 bison in the park. And so I actually had to reword the script and say something like just a generation ago you had bison rumbling by the salvos of the Yellowstone geysers and stuff like that. But yeah, so I handed Joe those pictures on top and he made the paintings on bottom. Joe, do you have anything to add to that process?
Um, well, you can see I kind of it's still very much in the realm of realism, but kind of what we were going for with that kind of nature montage scene when the Nez Perce arrive in Yellowstone. And if you've watched the video, you get the impression that this was almost kind of a surreal, in a sense, fantastical environment. And then we do a harsh cut to where they are currently in the story. And there are no bison left. You don't really see any wolves. A lot of them have been poisoned or killed off. So you can kind of see I took inspiration from these photos. Um, Very similar composition, pretty much the same composition, but really kind of pushed the color dynamics, the cools and the warms to make it feel a little more vibrant, almost dipping into fantasy, but not quite. So there was kind of an aesthetic choice to make it rise above the kind of gloomy nature of the video, just as a nice respite. So yeah.
Do you recall how long it took you each of these to make?
Um, well, when I have a good reference, which these are both great references because we took, I don't know, we probably took hundreds of photos, right? And these
Yeah.
were just some of the best. Uh, Maybe at least 3 or 4 hours. It's kind of hard to judge because there's sometimes like I'll work on them for a few hours and then come back and work on it a little bit. Um, and then you'll say, "Oh no, 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 we can't have this," or new research shows that you can't have this many bison in it or something, and then you amended it and you're like, okay, but maybe if this is a flashback. So this was like a lot of push and pull, but yeah, you for these maybe like, I don't know, 4 hours a piece or something, maybe a little longer.
Which is on the shorter side for a lot of your paintings.
Yeah, but whenever I have pretty decent references, it becomes a lot easier because the big issue with digitally painting a lot of, our work is composition. And I'll be like working really hard on something and I'll be like several hours in and I'm like, why is this just not clicking? I feel like I have the right colors, I feel like the right forms, the right value range, but something's not working. And often it comes down to composition. So like your eye isn't drawn to the thing you want your eye to be drawn to. So in these, both of the photos kind of had a composition baked in. So like um, top right, we can see like our eyes kind of drawn to the geyser, but also the bison. There seems to be a natural flow there. So that was pretty easy to plot out because you already had in the photo. So I
Yeah,
drew
it was
pretty
funny.
heavy
There were some
inspiration.
comments, people saying, "Oh, originals are better," and then there were some comments on the post that I made about how the paintings are better, and I was like, "Well, if you're saying the originals are better, you're complimenting my photography, so I'll take that too."
Yeah, and it's well. I was just going to say the thing I like about painting with photo references is how much can I like distill that kind of realism from the photo, but still have a very painterly kind of brushy feel to it as
Yeah, you
well.
sort of determine the emotion of the piece
Yeah,
in a way that might not have been in the photo. Okay, so today it's basically going to be, if you guys are familiar with the director's commentaries when people used to buy DVDs and stuff, it's basically going to be that. We're going to look at some of the, in my opinion, some of the best paintings in the Nez Perce one, and some of the paintings that have the most historical detail in them. That's sort of a segue to just talk about a lot of the minutia that we include in it, whether it's the patterns on somebody's clothes or the pattern on the coat of the horse. We're going to look a bit about some of that, and we're also going to just sort of use that as a segue to talk about the Nez Perce. So, on that same theme, you guys are welcome to ask questions throughout the show. We'll probably go for about 45 minutes or an hour. And I'll give priority to Nez Perce questions. You can ask any question you want. Nez Perce questions would be nice. I have all that stuff top of mind, fresh of mind, or super chats that help support the channel. We're sort of at the whims of the algorithm. The video actually hasn't done that well relative to a lot of our other ones, but
yeah,
super
something's going
chats
on
and
with this
stuff like
video.
that
A lot
help.
of people said that they didn't get the notification. They didn't even notice we dropped this video, or like the last 3 or 4 videos, they haven't gotten a notification and they have to manually check.
Yeah,
So we're talking to creator support on that one because something's a little fishy.
yeah. Actually, a good question. Before we dive into that first painting, separate from those other ones, Joe, do you show Chris a preliminary sketch slash painting before doing a finalized piece?
Um, Sometimes, usually what will happen is Chris will give me, and we've shown this in other live streams. There's like an entire, dozens of pages of history research, artifacts, archaeology, all this different painting reference that I can use to determine whether something's going to be historically accurate, down to like the patterns on a Native American's blanket or something. But usually, what happens is Chris will give me like a 3 to 4 sentence thing, saying, "Here's what they would be wearing. Here's what it might look like." And then often link some inspiration. Usually, it's photos or other artists' works, other renditions, or even just like a feeling. Like if we like the overall color or tone from a specific movie, even if it has nothing to do with our history topic, he might link that and say, I like these colors, I like the blues in here, try to implement that in, try to make that
Is
feel
literally in the past, sometimes it's like it's a screenshot of Red Dead Redemption, and I'm like,
oh yeah, that
all
happens a
right,
lot,
I
especially
love
with
this
these videos.
color. We don't put Arthur Morgan in the painting, but give me that same vibe.
But sometimes Chris does provide a sketch and he tries his best, but
Oh yeah,
mostly it's for I mean, Chris isn't really an artist at all, so it's mostly for composition. Like maybe we could have the British here and the Jamaican Maroons here, and they're shooting at each other. So
Right. And
maybe,
so
yeah,
some of that can
placement
be
usually.
artistic in nature, or a lot of it is more just um, I want to give you an accurate feel of what this looks like. So I don't know. We could go through some stuff. Yeah, I can bring up something, and once we get to one of the paintings, I'll bring up the reference that I provided you and how crappy it looks compared to what you did. Okay, so keep watching. You'll see that this one is one of the most detailed paintings that we've done in probably a really, really, really long time.
As far as
So
historical research, there's a lot of tiny little things.
I don't
Yeah.
know. I don't even know how you could quantify it. It's several hours of research into all of these minute details for one Nez Perce village, and then I would guess probably 5 hours plus for you to paint it, right?
This was longer than 5 hours for sure.
Like 10, you think?
Maybe closer to 10. Yeah, this was a
Yep.
multiple day piece.
So I was just going to go through. I'll zoom on. I'll zoom in on some different things that you probably didn't think anybody thought about, and you'll see we thought about it way too much. So, so even the stack of smoke that you see here is related to the historical reality of it. So it's not coming out from one end. And that's because the Nez Perce at this point in history, this point in the video, I'm sort of showing a bit of a flashback before the war to some vague time, probably post Lewis and Clark visit in 1805, but before the Nez Perce War in 1877. Now, at that time, they had transitioned to using teepees more often, but they would still occasionally, and sometimes it depended on the season, use these bigger lodges that were almost like triangular tents, but very tall. And those would be either stitched together buffalo hides or reed mats. Now, it had a slit on the top of it. So if, and I believe it was about an inch or two the between the two slats, and so it would be open and they could cover it if it was raining, but you would have smoke coming out of the top like you see in the video. And the reason why they were transitioning to teepees, so you can actually see most of these are teepees around there. Teepees were more mobile, but what happened is actually pretty fascinating. The Nez Perce probably didn't have contact with any Europeans until 1805 with Lewis and Clark, but they had increasingly, especially those people a little bit farther east, taken up buffalo hunting. So they would venture across those Bitterroot Mountains, which I mentioned in the video, and meet, say, the Crow tribe or other Plains American Indian tribes. And they started to transition away from sort of the plateau Pacific Northwest culture and take on a lot more elements that were similar to the plains cultures. And so, whether it's the teepee or even the war bonnets that they wore, were things that were a lot heavily borrowed from the plains cultures that were developing at that time around the horse. And so you would have a seasonal bison hunt. You'd bring back bison meat. But the rest of the time, as you can see here, salmon is a huge staple in their diet. And as far as those lodges, you can see a couple depictions here. I believe the one on the right is made out of canvas, and that's because as time went on and the buffalo were nearing extinction, they wound up transitioning their teepees to canvas. All right. And then, so even looking at the woman right here, she has some salmon in a basket. But what she's wearing is what's called a basket hat. So I'll have some depictions of that in the coming slides. Two braids seems to be the most common hairstyle among women at the time. You have these woven pouches that you could store a lot of the roots or berries or other things, and it would just be sort of slung over the shoulder. And then we'll also look at some of the intricate embroidered patterns, beads, and stuff like that. And what I really like about the Nez Perce pattern is they're very colorful and very geometric. So you almost have a lot of triangles, trapezoids, things like that. So here you can see sort of the resemblance here. You even have these things next to their ears, which I believe are seashells.
Yeah, I don't think they're technically earrings. I don't think they pierce their ears. It almost looks like it went into the hair or
Some
hanged
of them,
off
yeah,
above the
seem to
ear.
be affixed to
I'm willing to be
the hair.
corrected by any Nez Perce in the comments though.
But you can see, so the pattern on the hats that you see, the woman on the right is from another picture in the video that Joe made. But we are taking these patterns from as much historical reference as we can.
Hmm.
And then right down to those basket hats, you see
Basket
lots of
hats.
colors
Yeah.
and stuff there. You see these trapezoidal patterns. The pouches too. This is a surviving pouch, so you see those triangles, and you can imagine it was much more colorful back in the day. And then even the horse in the background of that painting, you can see
It's a couple
that, you know,
horses. Yeah.
how many people would recognize that? I'm not sure. Actually, a couple people from the community post actually got it, but this was known as the Appaloosa horse. So it wasn't. There's sometimes a misconception that the Nez Perce invented this or had created this breed through selective breeding. So it sounds like it existed at the time, but it was heavily favored by the Nez Perce, and the Nez Perce also practiced selective breeding to have very strong horses. What's really interesting is that by the time Lewis and Clark make contact in 1805, the Nez Perce have already had horses for a really long time. And those are horses that presumably came from the Spanish in the late 1500s. And they had escaped into the wilderness and sort of been bred by lots of the Native American peoples all through the plains and traded. And so there's actually an interesting anecdote from a bit later in the history. I believe it's mid 1800s, but there is a Euro American speaking with the Nez Perce, and a Nez Perce man says that, look, you've brought disease and dispossessed us in all of these ways. And the European says, Euro American says that, well, we brought you the horse. Doesn't that count for anything? And he said, we had the horse long before you guys came. And that was because they probably gained the horse in the 1730s, I think it is.
Hmm.
At least sometime in that first half of the 1700s. And they had it for over 70 years by the time Lewis and Clark show up. And at that time, Lewis and Clark, you can see the comments in their journals. They're sort of astounded at how great these horses look. They look very strong. They've been well bred in a certain way. The method of gelding or castration that they did with their horses, and this is how you get demonetized if I was going to go into detail, but Lewis and Clark commented about how the method of horse castration that the Nez Perce used was very efficient and somehow less prone to infection than the one that Americans were using at the time. So, so you can see from that pattern is a classic Appaloosa pattern. And the Nez Perce just seemingly also really like this pattern of fur. And so this photo on the left is one at the time. I believe it's like 10 years after the Nez Perce War. And there's a more modern one. So the Appaloosa were almost wiped out, I believe, by the U.S. Army after the war. But they've been saved and sort of preserved in a certain way by other Native Americans and by the Nez Perce to keep that breed alive. And then also another cool background detail. Again, this is just one painting. The cradle board, kind of a cool thing a lot of indigenous nations used at the time. Babies would be in there.
Cozy looking.
Yeah, the one on the left and the middle are Nez Perce, and then the one on the right is a different Pacific Northwest people, I believe. But that kid just looked really cute and happy. And then the last detail on this specific village painting was just the painted aspect on one of the teepees. And it looks a lot like it wasn't necessarily that everybody would paint their teepees, but a lot of times a chief's teepee, or just presumably if you had more time to decorate it, you could decorate your teepee. And so the pattern that Joe used here was inspired by other patterns that you see uh, also using teepees at the time, those Plains peoples with whom the Nez Perce had contact. We know that the Nez Perce sometimes use natural dyes to paint the outsides of their teepees. And so you can see similar things like the horse sort of wrapping around in kind of this reddish dye that's just going around the teepee. So that was just a cool thing. And I think, yeah, I just talked for 12 plus minutes about the research and a few details that went into one specific painting that we made. And, that has, I don't know, probably has like 6 seconds or 10 seconds of airtime in the video. But part of it for us is we get so obsessive about these details, and we want you guys to feel like we're taking it very seriously. We're never going to be going to Mid-Journey and plugging this into something, and then you get everybody wearing a headdress and a 15
Yeah.
foot tall teepee, and
Especially when it comes to Native American videos. I'm guessing Mid-Journey and whatever AI program doesn't have a specialized knowledge of the specific aesthetics and cultural distinctions between the different tribes, which is why I've seen certain YouTube videos when they cover Native Americans. Sometimes, the Comanche look like Aztecs or ancient Sumerians, and
yeah. Or
sometimes
I
they,
saw Cleopatra with a Native American feather headdress, and
yeah.
it's like, if you want to use AI, you're just not taking history seriously, and I think you do
Well, AI does
a
history
disservice.
as well as Marvel does when it comes to representing um, the Norse aesthetic. I mean, it's like kind of almost a cartoonized, cliche, stereotypical version.
Yeah, whatever stereotypes are out there and whatever inaccurate art is out there is only going to be perpetuated by a generator that isn't doing background research or anything like that. I just want to take a quick couple minutes, just a reminder. We do have the Mongolia trip coming in August. If you like exploring other cultures, you can actually come with Joe and I at the end of the first week of August. It's a week long tour of Mongolia. You can join us, and it really is you're just sitting with a different culture. So again, this is the homeland of Genghis Khan. We're actually seeing the huge Genghis Khan statue, but we're going to get a sense for the nomadic living of the Mongols that has persisted for millennia. So most of the time we'll be sleeping in yurts as we're making our way through the Mongolian steppe. There's even a point where we ride camels along the Gobi Desert. There's kayaking, we see prehistoric sites, and then toward the end there's a folk concert with some throat singing and a bunch more. If you are at all curious about that, just click the top of the top of the description. I put the link to the Mongolia trip. You can see the entire itinerary, and yeah, it'll be a really good time if you are interested in learning about other cultures or you like Mongols, anything like that. It's just gonna be one of those trips you can talk about for the rest of your life and be like, yeah, I slept in that and I rode camels along there,
Yeah.
and yeah, you
Everyone
got
expects to go to, Paris and Rome, but Mongolia is one of those places that if you say you went to Mongolia, people are like, oh, well, how was that? I've never
yeah.
heard of anyone who's gone to Mongolia before.
Yeah, so it's run through Trova Trip is a company that helps coordinate lots of these. And if you remember last year, I put out a poll asking you guys where you wanted to go. Mongolia was tied with Italy at the end of it, and Trova Trip was like, "You're the only one who's ever had Mongolia in first place." And it's like, yeah, that's that's what we cover. But yeah, it'll make it a very special trip. It'll be a unique experience. Okay, so the other painting, I didn't want to derail us too much with the Mongolia stuff, but just thought that was a cool shout out. The This one I didn't need to go into too much historical detail. All the clothes and stuff are going to be the same that we had just talked about, but I just thought this was so beautiful. So this was the idea for the opening shot. I was like,
Mm.
Joe had an idea to kind of have some sense of danger at first, but I was like, give me a bit of relief and just let us sit with some
Wait, what
beauty.
was my idea? I forgot.
Well, I think we were going to use this visual, but we had tweaked the music quite a bit because you
Oh
had
yeah, yeah.
some foreboding sense, and I was like, give me a few, give me a few seconds of serenity here. And that's because what this is depicting in the video is a place now known as Tolo Lake, and the Nez Perce, as they were being forced from the Wallowa Valley and the other places and made to go onto the reservation with very little notice, they were all meeting at this place that was a very special and sacred ritual meeting place around Tolo Lake, where you could fish and you could pick what these are lilies known as camas, and they have this beautiful color to them, and they would eat the bulbs of those. So you could harvest this, and it was just people would play cards and stuff like that. This is post European contact, so you have lots of games and stuff going on. So it just seemed like a respite for the Nez Perce at the time. And yeah, I mean, we're not exaggerating with the beauty of this. This is actually what it looks like in Idaho, the camas lilies, and it also just so happened that that time was it's early June when we're showing it in the video, and that time is during the camas lily bloom. So it's really beautiful. Okay. Right. So this one is before the Battle of the Big Hole. So that refers to the Big Hole River. You can see the Nez Perce camp here is perched along some stream, sort of in this valley. I said I would show my own. Oh yeah, I can show you what I gave Joe as a reference. Can I share my screen? Let's share my screen. So that is what I gave Joe as a reference. And I think there too. I ended up changing the stream a bit because I looked more at
Yeah.
it. But you can see I can give Joe just a rough idea of what it looks like, and then he'll go and make it look beautiful. But what you'll see, so some of the details you see here, there was 80 plus teepees. I believe it was 89 teepees recorded along the stream. You have the entire Nez Perce caravan camping out here. And at this point, they actually think they're in the clear because they had gotten by some U.S. troops that were meant to stop them. But the Nez Perce believed that Howard was behind them, and that as long as they weren't living on their homelands, which were being seized, they didn't really need to go on the reservation. They could go somewhere else. They kind of didn't have an idea that the entire U.S. government would sort of coordinate to mobilize against them and catch them as they kept traveling, and they were very far from their homeland. Another cool detail: it was described in one of the soldiers' journals as a pretty clear night. So I had Joe just show a lot of stars in the sky at that point. And then here are some of the historical references, so we know exactly where the camp was. So this is that top part is a bit of an inside look at the stuff that I give Joe. But I'm trying to show Joe where the blue is, where the soldiers were coming from. They were there, and then they actually moved down into that willow thicket along the stream that's being pointed to at the red. And on that, right before that red arrow, was where the Nez Perce camp was. Today, I don't know if it's still, I don't know if it's perpetually standing or if they put this out every now and then, but there are kind of these symbolic markers for where the teepees were, because 60 to 90 Nez Perce were more or less indiscriminately killed during the Battle of the Big Hole while they were sleeping. So right, here's another one. I can show you my really crappy rendition that I give Joe, and I say, Joe, make this look good. But I'll also ask for specific things, and so I'll have a huge guide for him. So when I'm saying I want a woman doing this and a man with this, and this should be on the back of the horses, he already has the guide, so he can look up what the typical male attire was for the Nez Perce, or what the horses look like. And so, yeah, you can see right here is what I'm giving Joe. And
You know,
like
remember I had to
I'll
go
just try
back
to.
and redo the background because like it was like the background I originally painted in. You're like geographically that doesn't make sense if we are on the ground there in that location. So I had to go in and redo the entire background, which was frustrating. But I had like I had some trees and stuff. I had a bit of, like suggestion of woods, but I think at this point during the retreat there wouldn't have been trees in the background.
Yeah. Yeah. And so one of the interesting details here is this thing that he's holding here. And again, nobody would notice this. This is not on screen that long. But this is what's known as a quirt. So it's a riding whip that was used. We actually have some existing ones from the Nez Perce. You would have like a bit of a leather strap, and then a lot of times like antler or bone that you would hold on, and a wrist strap. And so that's what he's using to spur his horse on here. The other thing that kind of looks weird, and you probably, when I was first looking up the pictures, I didn't know what it was. These big long poles here. So the Nez Perce at this point are moving their entire caravan away. Their camp has been attacked. They need to get out of there, leave what they can. As the caravan is moving, they eventually just don't have their teepees anymore. So by the time we get to Bear Paw, you can probably see as the video goes on, especially after they've left Yellowstone, they don't even have any teepees anymore. They're taking little strips of canvas and stretching them over whatever sticks or poles they find. So this is known as a travois, if you want to use the French pronunciation. I've seen some American pronunciations like travois or something. If I had mentioned it in the video, there'd be somebody correcting me on something there. But this was basically a method of transportation that Native Americans used. So you could throw this on the back of your horse and balance something in between, and you could sort of ride like that. So sometimes you see people on the back of them, or you can look up old photos, and people in the Wild West you'd have some injured person out on the frontier, you bring them back. If you don't have a wagon, it's the next best thing. Before, and actually still during the time that they had horses, Native Americans would sometimes use dogs to do the same thing. So we have paintings of them.
Oh,
This dog just looks happy. You just throw a travois on the back of them, and they'll help you
what
carry
is
some
that on the
stuff.
back of the dog there?
Which one?
On the right.
The one?
So it looks like a little rodent on top of him.
I don't know. Might be
Is
a
that a
toy.
monkey? Yeah, maybe that's a toy.
But yeah, I mean, it's just, I didn't mention this in the video, but so they have about 2,000 horses when they set out the Nez Perce. And then as they go along, they're actually stealing from those battles. They're able to loot horses and mules from the U.S. forces that are attacking them. And they also loot a bunch of ammo. So that keeps them supplied. Actually, at the Battle of the Big Hole, I think they steal about 2,000 rounds of ammo, and they destroy the howitzer cannon that was firing on their village. So they also had, I believe it was a couple hundred dogs with them. And Nez Perce loved their dogs, and you can see they're not entirely useless. They can help you carry stuff if you want. One of the last ones I just wanted to talk about was the Nez Perce man and woman one. So I've been doing this increasingly in our videos just because I don't want to just sit with the war. I want to give you guys a sense of who we're dealing with, some of the customs that they had. We have so I did this in our Ireland one. I did this with the troops in the Mamluk versus Mongol one. And it's also a way just to show off some more detail to you guys, to show you that we're putting some thought into this. And, history isn't just war, and it isn't just X, Y, or Z. It's also the way people live, the way people dressed. And there's something, I always think that's very important because, especially for Native American subjects, because I think even people who are sometimes pro Native American or can sort of disparage Native American history can share a similar view of kind of Native Americans as a monolith. And so I always like to give an idea of this isn't just another Native American group with a different name and they act exactly the same as the other ones. Um, these are Native Americans with their own customs, their own beliefs, their own ways of dressing, and there can be similarities with other regional groups, but I like to give you an idea of kind of who we're dealing with and what makes them unique. So we end up learning things that maybe we didn't learn in school. So I'm seeing a super chat come in. I will get to that super chat in a second. Let me go through this painting and then I'll get to that. Thank you for the super chat though. So I did look at the woman in the other one and some of the style that they had. What he's wearing here is a war shirt. These were worn obviously during war, but also different ceremonial purposes. They were often believed to grant protection, some level of spiritual protection, and that is a related concept to something that I mentioned in the video, which is the Wayakin or Wayakin. It is a guardian spirit that Nez Perce believed they attained at a certain age after some trial that they would go through out in the wilderness. And you would get this guardian spirit, oftentimes would be associated with some certain animal, but it would grant some ability to you. So if your guardian spirit was a wolf or a bear or a hawk or a coyote or a fox, it's going to give you some different qualities. So it might make you particularly good at stealth, or it might make you brave. There was an account from the 20th century from someone who lived through this. I believe it was Yellow Wolf, who lived through the Nez Perce War. Really fascinating because it puts in perspective how recent a lot of these events were. He's talking about how throughout the war, he's an older man at this point, but this is either just before World War I or during World War I. And he's talking about how he had always had, through his guardian spirit, protection from bullets and arrows. But he believed that if he went to war nowadays, and if he wasn't so old, that he would die because his guardian spirit didn't protect him against gas warfare, which was just really fascinating to hear. It's like that in my mind, these last American Indian wars and World War I and those other wars are so separate in terms of the period of history, but you have people who lived through all of this. I also have a bonus episode related to this on the Patreon. And one of the really fascinating things is that the last surviving member, I believe, dies. The last surviving person who lived through the Nez Perce War was about 4 or 5 years old as it happened. He lost his sister and mother in the Nez Perce War at the Battle of the Big Hole. And, he still was carrying that trauma. He died in 1973. So at that, imagine what it's like that you live through these last American Indian wars. You live through being pursued by General Howard, and you live through World War I and World War II. By 1973, you are a good chunk of the way through the Vietnam War. So it puts in perspective how recent a lot of this stuff was. So what you'll see on these war shirts, there's a ton of intricate designs and beadwork. I love a lot of the colors that the Nez Perce have. You'll see lots of like purples, yellows, light blues. And then the hair that you'll notice as well is almost like a pompadour style. So a lot of times men will have braids, but the front of their hair would sort of be like slicked back in a way. This is a painting of Chief Joseph. You can see just how intricate this beadwork is on these. How long would it have taken to make this? There's a zoom in on that same painting. And we actually still have surviving war shirts of Chief Joseph. So this is very likely the same shirt that he was wearing during that painting. And these are selling at auction, and they're either in museums or private collections now. Here's another one of Chief Joseph wearing a war shirt. And you can see, I believe this is the same one today that he was wearing in that. Okay, so before we get to I have a couple of questions from Instagram, but let's get to the super chat. Zero Connection, thank you for the $10.
Thank you, Zero.
Euros.
Really
With
nice.
limited sources, how do historians separate? Let me go back to here. How do historians separate truth from biased propaganda? For example, after the Battle of Kadesh, both the ancient Egyptians and Hittites claim they won. I mean, so what I'll end up doing in a lot of our videos is that I'm looking at other historians' works and different perspectives on the matter, but I often hedge my bets in the sense that I'm not going to overclaim certain things. Now, there are sometimes every source is going to have its own bias, and so there are some elements of criticism, literary criticism, that we can apply to sources. One of those, I think, is called the law of embarrassment, and it's basically imagine if you had 5 American accounts saying that we got slaughtered in this battle, they completely lost this battle, or if you only had one, but you would expect them to be biased in favor of themselves. So there's a good chance that that event did happen. But yeah, I mean, so much of the stuff that's really, really ancient, you're going to take things with a grain of salt and sort of, I don't know, it's part of the reason probably why I don't deal in so much ancient history, because if you want those up close narratives with lots of details, then the sources are so thin on that. So you're partly relying on archaeology and stuff.
A good example too is the towards the end of our Viking versus Irish video, you did find an account of them taking the Viking who allegedly killed Brian Boru in battle, and them just pretty much cutting open his stomach and making him wrap his entrails around a tree. Of course, you didn't have any confirmation that this account legitimately happened, but you put that in anyways, but with kind of the disclaimer, it was claimed. So you can at least get that, you can still have a historical suggestion, and that still is history, because in a sense, even if maybe it didn't really happen, it's still a legend or something, or a story that the Irish did pass along with each other at that time.
Yeah, and they still have value in how people view those events. So one of the main sources that we have for the Battle of Clontarf, that's that last battle where Brian Boru dies.
Yeah,
Sorry if you
Viking
haven't seen the video.
Irish.
He dies. He's not still alive. But the source is probably written between 70 and 110 years after the actual battle. And so you go, well, you can't really trust a lot of the specific details that they're bringing up here. You can't trust that. They also mention angels hanging over the battlefield, angels and demons hanging over the battlefield before the battle starts, ready to harvest the souls of the people who fought in the battle. So a lot of these specific movements in the battles that it gives you, it might be the only account you have of those specific movements. Probably can't trust them that much. There are some people who argue in favor of it and say, look, well, presumably you could have someone who's an octogenarian still alive who survived it or was around at the time, if you take the earliest consideration. But at the very least, the author Sean Duffy makes a good point about this. Even though it's 70 to 100 years later, some of the specifics of how Irish warfare was fought at the time can be relied upon, in the sense that even in biased sources, you need to keep in mind who the audience is. So there might be a bias that you're trying to push. And so with that account, there's a bias that is trying to glorify Brian Boru. But the author makes a good point that even if we can't trust all of that, there is a sense that if there were no shields in Ireland at the time, if nobody used shields, if nobody used axes, if there was no arrow warfare, you wouldn't be able to write that and try to convince people that this is how war was fought. So it at least gives you basically the way that you're writing has to somewhat be credible to your audience. And so there are certain things that you can glean about warfare at the time. And that would be that was a great question. Thank you for that question.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you for the super chat.
Yeah. Okay, so let me get to these. Yeah, and if you guys want to throw any more super chats in, please feel free. They help out the channel, keep us going, so we don't need to rely on
Or
the
if you want to check
algorithm
out
so
our
much.
Patreon, I mean, we have some bonus episodes over there.
Yeah, we're gonna revamp the Patreon soon, so just stay tuned. We have been putting some bonus episodes on there. If you get to the end of an episode and you're like, I want 5 or 6 minutes more of this,
Yeah.
we've been uploading things called tangents, where I include some amazing new facts, and they're not as heavily produced as some of our videos, but it's going to be my narration and some of Joe's art that was already used in the video, and just some really cool stuff that I had wished had made the video. But again, we have to cut stuff for time at certain times. Instagram questions. You can follow us at HistoryDose. I think you can just click it next to my name, at least on mobile, to our channel name. Long-term Bull 13 asks, thoughts on how empires/kingdoms change over time. Natural law equals cycles. I would guess that's sort of asking a bit about an almost environmentally or demographically deterministic view of empires' rise and fall. Is that what you're getting, Joe?
Yeah, I think, yeah, it's probably the view that an empire can only be so big, and then it has to kind of, recourse back into where it came. Smaller cultures dissolve and stuff.
Yeah, I think my perspective on that, these ideas of there's a cycle of empire. You get to some certain point, or even climate related theories of empire rising and falling. I think a lot of those are compelling in a way, but I never place so much emphasis on them, just because in historiography, so the study of history, how we look at a specific period of history and find causal chains, causes, and events, there's sometimes a derision among modern academics about what was called great man history, or it's been coined great man history. So this was the kind of history that was told probably when you were in elementary school, where you learn, okay, Columbus did this, this happened, and this person did this. And so you're just sort of ascribing the Napoleonic wars just to Napoleon, or you're only looking at one specific event. Now, of course, that's not right, and I don't think anyone was really ever arguing for that. And there are these bigger trends that allow, Napoleon doesn't come to power if the French Revolution doesn't happen. He had no control over that. Now, at the same time, I think that can lead some people to underestimate the power of really specific individuals or really minute events on history in a way that you can't say was decided by cycles. So what does the world look like if Napoleon has a heart attack as the French Revolution's happening? I don't think that you find somebody else who does it that way. You could find somebody else who tries to establish some empire, but it would be so different that it's almost pointless to try to figure out what it looks like. Or I always think the New World, the European contact with the New World. What Columbus does is so momentous. You say, okay, well, somebody would have found it at some point. Some European would have made their way to the New World at some point. But it didn't have to be Columbus, because it didn't have to be the Spanish who did that first. Imagine if you had a different way that the Treaty of Tordesillas was cut up. What does the world look like? Well, if it was all Portuguese, if all of South America and Central America was controlled by the Portuguese, at the very least, there would have been a different policy. There'd be a different way of dealing with people. What is, if people aren't speaking Spanish, you have a completely different culture that takes root there. Imagine if it had been delayed and somehow it was the English that established a foothold in South America. You just have a completely different world. There's all these really tiny things. specific actions that people take that can have an enormous impact on the world that we see today. All right, so let me get to that last question. So I'll do one here, and then if you guys have any more questions, just throw them in the chat. Of course, I'll give some priority to Nez Perce questions or
Yeah, we have a few
super
questions
chats.
already in the chat
I can look at some
from
of
the
those.
beginning too.
But get them in now if you can. Arthelius. I'm just going to act like I pronounced that right. Arthelius. Is there going to be an episode on the Battle of Thermopylae? I want to do some stuff. I want to do some ancient stuff, that feeling of epic battle. I think our last Greco-Roman one, Boudica, did not do that well. But I feel like something's
India
got to
did
pop
well.
off somewhere.
India wasn't Greco-Roman, but it was ancient.
Yeah. So I feel like there's a lot of potential for one of those to just give an epic feel. And as a little teaser to you folks, the next episode is a Mongol related one. We are sitting in Mongolia, basically.
Mongol origins.
We're gonna get a sense for the Mongol culture, their beliefs, and sort of the hard world that created the Mongols. So I actually have some really exciting news on that front that I won't share now, but stay tuned. Pancake mix. When will the World War I video most likely release? I'm mean, to rush you all. I just can't wait for it. I would say probably May. That was the idea, is that it would be
May
after
or
the
June,
Mongol
yeah.
episode. Some things got pushed back. Tara Walsh. Love Trafalgar. Yeah, we got a lot of great comments about Trafalgar and this Nez Perce one. I think a number of people have said those are our best videos. Awesome videos of Native Americans and Christmas band in Massachusetts is great. That's a vintage one.
It's like our first 3 or 4 videos.
From Plymouth, Mass. All right, another New Englander. Can't wait to your next video. The next one will be about Mongols. Thank you. Boba Fett, I love your native / indigenous American videos. Well done. My family is native, and I can't wait to show the kids as they grow. Thank you.
That's nice.
Appreciate it.
What tribe do you belong to, Bubba?
Yeah, I'm assuming Boba Fett is not
Mandalorian.
Yeah, it's Mandalorian. That Boudica episode did absolutely slap. Yeah, I liked it. That was a fun one. All right. So I think we are sort of winding down here. I hope you guys enjoyed this exploration of the behind the scenes aspect of History Dose and a lot of the stuff that goes into the art. I've been thinking about making a more condensed video just when we get those comments of where do you get this art? How do you make it? What AI did you use? Then I can just show you like, now we put in 110 hours into this one.
Yeah.
So yeah,
there was a earlier question too. Oh, are you still doing that?
Oh, hold on. Well, I just
saw
Kieran
from Samuel Hillard.
Okay. Well,
farther
Kieran
up.
says, would you guys ever cover Ireland and England's 800-year history? So our one on Conor McGregor's walkout song, The Foggy Dew, we do sort of a quick zoom through that. But I think if we could do, because we were just trying to put the Easter Rising in perspective. But sort of like Zero Connection is saying right now, Cromwell in Ireland. If we're going to do more English Irish stuff, it would be specific events like that. Most of our videos are not summary of 1,000 years or anything like that. We kind of like to find those specific events and let you sort of sit with a time period and get a sense for one event. And then as you consume more and more History Dose, all these doses add up to maybe some tapestry of something reasonably accurate about a period in history. And maybe it's hopefully challenging you guys about your preconceived notions about a certain point in history, or if not that, maybe it's enjoyable to go sit with another period in history and feel like you've experienced it. Because part of the idea with this one was just to with this live stream was to give you we're putting into getting this right. So we're not just lifting whatever we think is a stock representation of what a Native American village looks like. We're doing as much research as we can to make sure the horse looks accurate and the pouch and the pattern and the headwear looks right.
Yeah,
Okay,
we have
see,
a problem. It causes us pain if we put something in a video and then someone says, "Well, why do you have that type of horse? The tribes didn't use that horse." And we're like, oh my gosh, we got that wrong. Because it breaks the entire illusion that you're time traveling. You're going back and you're seeing, what did this battle actually look like? Or what did this settlement actually look like? So we get so obsessive about trying to make it look like you were there.
yeah. So Samuel Hillard says, did the Nez Perce people have any consequences for entering Yellowstone, or was Yellowstone not an established national park at the time? So it wasn't. So it was established. It was established in 1872. So it had been established for 5 years at that point. We referenced them coming in conflict with some tourists during their stay in Yellowstone National Park, and that's because you have people coming in there at the time. What is fascinating is that hunting was still allowed in Yellowstone National Park for a few years after that point. And so when I reference poisoning animals, there was a certain practice that you had hunters in Yellowstone trying to poison carcasses that wolves would eat to kill off the wolves. At a certain point, they gradually ban hunting in Yellowstone National Park, which always just seems so shocking to me. You're setting up a national park. We're going to preserve this. Let's get rid of the animals first. It's like, almost
Yeah,
seemed to be a big
it's the
part.
best part of Yellowstone.
Yeah. So yeah, it wasn't, but the consequence was not that they was not like applied to them because they entered Yellowstone. It was they were being chased no matter where they went. It wasn't that they didn't have their park pass. Kieran, yes, we did. We do have a Easter Rising video. That's what that one is. The Foggy Dew video is just it's called the history behind the Foggy Dew song, and that's all about the Easter Rising. All right, History Dose always posting bangers. Yeah,
Thank you,
stay
Hercules.
stay tuned. All right, we a little bit under an hour. Thank you all for
Yeah.
joining.
Thank you, guys.
We'll see you next time. Bye.
Bye.